today's lecture, we are starting to look at religion and intellectual trends and culture. And today's lecture will start with Confucianism. So Confucianism throughout this course has sort of been in the background, and we've very fundamentally looked at the basic principles of Confucianism and how Confucian ideology was used to structure the government and used in statecraft during the Choson dynasty. But now we're going to look at some more specific principles and values in Confucian thought. Now, before we do embark on this, there are a couple things that I'd like to make clear before we begin our discussion on Confucianism. So, first of all, Confucianism or Neo-Confucianism is not just one monolithic school of thought. It is extremely diverse, extremely varied. There are hundreds of different schools that fall under the umbrella of Confucianism. And so while all of these schools do share certain basic principles, because Confucianism had been around and developing for over 1,000 years, it's only natural that we would see the development, expansion, and the growth of different strains of Confucian thought over this period of time, this extended period of time. This is not unlike what we saw with, let's say, Christianity. Christianity too also encompasses hundreds of different schools or branches of Christianity, and each different sect is slightly different from the other. So the Methodists and the Presbyterians and the Lutherans, they're all slightly different as they are from and comparing Catholics and the Protestants, they're very different. And so this kind of an evolution and this kind of a development is actually quite natural, because as these major ideas begin to spread across regions, and as time progresses, and because the historical circumstances change, these ideas also change along with the context. And so it's very important for us to keep in mind that when we think of culture and religion and philosophy and these intellectual trends, it's very important for us not to treat them like fossils, as if they are frozen in time and have been transported through time in stasis, as if they have never changed, because that's actually not how it works. If you think about, as students, if you think about your own thought processes from the kinds of things that you understood and you believed when you were in middle school versus high school versus now as a university student, I would suspect that there have been great changes in your perspectives and your viewpoints and the way that you process and intake information. And so if this occurs on an individual level, then this obviously occurs to an even greater extent on the societal level. So that's the first point that I want to make, is that it's important for us not to treat these things as fossils, but more as living organisms and things that change and adapt over time and according to the circumstances and the context in which they are found. The second thing that I would like you also to remember from this lecture is when we talk about, this very large body of thought called Confucianism or Neo-Confucianism. Um, Confucianism generally tends to be associated these days, in modern times, with things that are traditional or stagnant or resistant to change. It's Confucianism is, and Confucian scholars, particularly from the Choson dynasty, are often depicted as just being very stubborn and not willing to accept or to acknowledge any kind of change, trying to insist on maintaining the status quo. And while that was the case amongst a certain population of Confucian scholars, this was not the case overall. And in fact, there were, because there's quite a bit of variety within that falls under the Confucian tradition, we find that particularly towards the end of the Joseon dynasty, there are many different schools of Confucian thought that were advocating for change and sometimes radical change, but still all falling under the rubric of Confucian thought. So this is what I refer to as Reform Confucianism. And it's a response to the changes during the time. By the end of the Joseon dynasty, we have a very different set of circumstances from the beginning of the Joseon dynasty. And so as a response to these changes, Confucian scholars were trying to find solutions to issues and problems, as you are all aware of now, that the Joseon dynasty was experiencing. And these Confucian scholars were trying to find solutions, but still based on Confucian ideology. All right, so please keep these 2 points in mind, that rather than think of Confucianism as an obstacle to change and reform, that actually there were quite a few Confucian scholars who showed creativity in trying to create solutions to problems at this time and were supportive of implementing reform. All right, so what is Confucianism, or where did it come from? Well, it was initially created by this scholar Confucius, who lived from 551 to 479 BCE. He lived at a time of great political chaos in China, in ancient China. And he decided, he was a minor official, and he decided to leave government service and try to think about ways to fix the problems that had occurred for the government at the time, because this was a chaotic time, and he didn't understand why China had descended into such turmoil, and was trying to figure out a way. And so a lot of this was based on statecraft and his idea of statecraft. And Confucius has kind of become like this, like a caricature. The popular Confucius you can find him on Hallmark greeting cards or in cartoons, and he's associated with being this old man with pithy one-liners. But this is a kind of a mocking Western caricature of this very prominent Chinese scholar. And what really is the tradition is we have this focus on statecraft. There are two two, I guess, major schools that came from Confucius' early thought. One was more statecraft oriented, and so focusing on the art of good governance, and the other was individual self cultivation. And so the one which is emphasizing statecraft, this stresses the role of the state and um, the state's role in creating a harmonious society. The second strain, which focuses on individual self-cultivation, um, this is this instead of emphasizing the state, emphasizes the individual and to a lesser extent semi-autonomous local institutions. But the idea that that in order to create a harmonious society, we have to begin with self-cultivation. So we have the development of the already from very early on these different emphases on still falling under the umbrella of Confucianism, but just a different emphasis, one emphasizing the state and the other emphasizing the individual. And we can see throughout as in Chinese intellectual history that Confucianism and Neo-Confucianism, which is new Confucianism, it's an evolution of thought as it develops. And so we have these various prominent Confucian and Neo-Confucian scholars. This gentleman over here, Wang Yangming, he emphasized this idea of innate knowing, that everybody from birth knows the difference between good and evil. And this is based on instinct or intuition, not rationality, and it does not require great study or scholasticism. And that one, because we all have this innate knowing, that gaining understanding occurs through careful and rational investigation of things and events. There's an element of meditation, of quiet sitting and thinking about these things, and the idea is that anybody can attain this and become wise. So this school of thought became actually very popular in Japan. And it was appealing not to elites, because the elites tended to prefer scholastic or intense study, but peasants, this was something that peasants could practice. And so this is one school of Neo-Confucianism that became very popular in Japan. Another one is the Chongju school. So we have this individual and this individual, Jushi, down here. Jushi, he was a Neo-Confucian scholar, and his emphasis was on trying to purify your principle through self-cultivation. And to do this, to purify yourself, this required intense study. And so you had to study the Confucian canon, the Confucian classics, and Jushi emphasized intellectual study over the study of sagehood. And so within all of these different schools of thought, we have many different ideas, many different focuses and emphases on what one should do. You know, should one focus on quiet sitting? Should one focus on intense study? So there's this great variety, and I'll give you one guess as to which one became very popular in the Choson dynasty. And you would be correct if you said that it was the rise of the kind of Neo-Confucianism that focuses on intense study. This kind of Confucianism, or the rise of Neo-Confucian, we see beginning to really develop in the Joseon dynasty around the 15th century. It is especially popular in the countryside, amongst scholars, Confucian scholars living in the countryside. Um, the the Joseon dynasty officials in the capital, in the central government, um, they are they prefer a more active state of Confucianism, the kind that focuses on statecraft. Makes sense, because if you're a government official, then that's your job, is um, to to govern the country and to try to figure out ways to govern properly. Then they would focus on the statecraft type of Confucianism. So this type of more metaphysical Neo-Confucianism, this we see developing out in the countryside first. By the 18th century, there are just all kinds of Neo-Confucian scholars throughout the Joseon dynasty. But this type is much more metaphysical, which means that it focuses on the investigation of the principles of reality, and also on the purification of one's principle, or li. And this is done through self-cultivation and through stress on proper relationships. So one can purify oneself, and we can make an ideal society through purifying your principle and making sure that you observe and preserve these proper relationships. So this type of Neo-Confucianism is more interested in making this world an ideal society. Now, how this affects Joseon society is that we begin to see the widespread compilation and publication of these clan genealogies, particularly from the beginning of the 17th century. And because the stress of this type of Neo-Confucianism is on proper relationships, it is essential that everybody in the family understands what their proper place and their proper role is in the family. And these clan genealogies, they very explicitly outline every individual's relationship with other members in their lineage, and how they are related to each other, and thus how they should behave towards each other, what their reciprocal obligations and responsibilities are. So this is why we begin to see the proliferation of these kinds of clan genealogies, because it's like a visual representation of everybody's proper place in the family. And so there's no question or no doubt as to what everybody's role is and what everybody's responsibilities are. And part of these responsibilities include funerary and memorial rituals. These are part of the family rituals that must be observed to maintain harmony and peace and stability in the family. Now, if you remember, the basic unit of the society, according to Confucian ideology, is the family. It's not the individual, but it's the family. So the family must be regulated in order for society to prosper and in order for the dynasty to do well. But if the family falls apart, society breaks down and the dynasty will fall. So because of this emphasis on the family, one's relationships with the family, in order to understand and to really um, kind of embody the um, responsibilities that each family member have. These family rituals must be observed on a regular basis, and they are based on um, this book that Jushi wrote. He wrote The Family Rites, and so these rituals they outline the individual practice and involvement, and the it's about observing respect of these lineage relationships. And it also, because in these funerary and memorial rituals, where the rituals are performed when a parent dies or when that's a funerary ritual, the memorial rituals are practiced um, in in remembrance of either your parents or your ancestors. So perhaps on the day that they died, then that's when these memorials are held. And this too, it only highlights that this parent-child or these family relationships, these continue on indefinitely. Death does not change these relationships. These relationships are eternal. So the rituals then perpetuate this idea. All right, when we get to the 17th century, as a result of the Hideyoshi invasions, the Indian Wars, and the Manchu invasions, um, these invasions were incredibly disruptive and destructive, and initiated a host of socioeconomic changes, which we have already discussed in previous lectures. Um, so, for example, we have great differentiation that begins to occur among the Yangban. Some become extremely powerful, others become impoverished. Um, and the central government comes to be increasingly dominated by a small number of these very powerful aristocratic Yangban families, the Polyol, who owned large landed estates. Um, and then as a result of this, we have the political and social marginalization of large numbers of local literati. And so you have these now Confucian scholars that are either have retreated to the countryside or confined to the countryside as a result of political exclusion. And so they begin to form their own bases in the countryside, and they establish their own Confucian academies. These are called the CHOSON. And they pursue what they believe to be Confucian orthodoxy. This is the Chengju learning. And they, from the countryside, they start to criticize the, the shortcomings of the state and its officials. We also have um, uh, occurring around the same time, the fall of the Ming and the rise of the Qing. So, so the Qing, these barbarians who have conquered the Ming, and um, this really kind of rocks the Confucian world order. As a result of this, we have some intellectual changes and an intellectual shift as well, because questions arise as to, do we stay loyal to the Ming? Do we switch to the Qing? If the Qing are barbarian, then doesn't this mean that the Joseon dynasty, we are the last safekeepers of Confucianism? But if we want to be practical, considering that we are direct neighbors with this formidable dynasty, perhaps it's more pragmatic to just keep on maintaining the relationship with them. So all of these things have an influence in Joseon and then intellectual changes at the time. And because from the 17th century we have we have these changes, we have great disruption and economic hardship, and increasing, families, young mom families that are becoming increasingly powerful and increasing tax burden on the peasants. Um, these kinds of socioeconomic changes then give rise to a reaction. Um, and we see now a critique of Chosen society and an effort to try to find solutions to these problems. And so one strain of Reform Confucianism was looking for more practical or pragmatic solutions to try to fix and like relieve the fiscal problems or to improve the livelihood of the people. Um, some Neo-Confucian scholars who traveled to Qing China and they saw the development of commerce over there, they were very impressed by this. And so they come back to the Joseon Dynasty and say, hey, maybe we need to reevaluate this whole commerce thing. And maybe this is a way to relieve these economic problems and to help the people um, have an alternate form of livelihood. So we have these reactions. This practical learning, again, this is a response to socioeconomic changes and to the political power being not monopolized by a few young bond families. But we also saw from the from after these, the 17th century on, that farmers are becoming increasingly impoverished, merchants are becoming richer. So because of these problems, we have these different ideas that are floating around to as solutions. So many of these practical learning scholars, they had their own vision of society, and in their idea or their vision of an ideal society, there was no social status distinctions. So they wanted to abolish these social status distinctions. They wanted to make opportunities for education more equal and merit-based. So rather than it being based on your family and your lineage, they said that this should be based on one's intellectual capacity. They incorporated the study of politics, economics, Chinese classical studies, historiography, geography, natural science, agriculture, etc. But the goal was the actual manifestation of things and pragmatic scholarship and methodology in a search for solutions to problems in society. And one of the things that some of these more prominent scholars focused on was the reform of agriculture. In previous discussions, when I've thrown this question out to you, what kind of reforms should we enact in the late Joseon Dynasty? This is one of the issues that comes up regularly, and you are quite insightful to see that, because this is precisely what Confucian scholars at the time identified as one of the key ways to improving the society. So the goal was to promote the sound development of a stable agricultural economy based on the independent self-employed farmer. So, for example, Yu Hyung-won, he came up with this idea of a public land system where the state would hold title to the land and would allocate a fixed amount of land to each farmer. Yi, another Reform Confucian scholar, his idea was the equal field system. So the idea was to guarantee in perpetuity to each peasant household the amount of land minimally necessary to maintain a livelihood. And so the state would would give this amount of land that this household would need to sustain itself, and then that household could hold it in perpetuity. Chongyagyong, he came up with the idea of the village land system, where the land would be owned and farmed in common by each village unit. So rather than the household, by the village unit. And then the harvest, whatever was harvested, would then be apportioned out on the basis of the labor actually performed by each individual. So, all these different scholars, they had different ideas on how to reform the agriculture, because they felt that this was really one of the more fundamental problems that needed to be solved. Another type of reform Confucianism was called Northern Learning. This arose in the urban areas of the capital of Seoul, and sought to bring about prosperity in the Joseon dynasty through gradual expansion of commercial and manufacturing activities. They were influenced by contemporary scholarship at the time in Qing China. They were also influenced by the commercial development that they saw in China. And so they thought that this could help to bring wealth and prosperity to the Joseon dynasty. Rather radical, a very radical thought, but this was something that they advocated. Some examples of Northern learning scholars were Yu Su-won, Park Ji-won, Hong Dae-yong, Park Jae-ga, and they really sharply criticized Yangban society. They saw Yangban, they saw the Yangban as parasites who performed no productive labor in society. And so they sharply criticized the Yangban. And they advocated for things like the introduction of the wagon and ship for transport and distribution. Making and trading goods, they thought, should be pursued by everybody, not just merchants and artisans. And they thought that the bureaucratic structure should be created around a core of professional public servants recruited through educational opportunities open to everybody. All right, so what are some of the themes that you're picking up on with all of these different types of reform Confucianism? Well, one is equality, meritocracy, and particularly in education and official recruitment. So, because by the 18th, 19th century, we have the exclusion of large numbers of men, Confucian scholars, from political power and political activity. This is a reaction to that. And it's all based on Confucian ideology, still all falls under the umbrella of Confucianism. But as you can see, they are trying to find creative, innovative solutions to these problems that they see. Another also strain of reform Confucianism is called national learning. This developed in the late 19th century, and these scholars had an interest in history, folk customs, Korean geography, and they wrote new histories of Korea. So rather than in other Confucian schools of thought, where the main subject is really China, or to be specific, ancient China, this shifts the subjectivity to Korea. So we have all of these different strains. Now, we have to talk about how Confucianism affected the status of women. And although we've talked about the distinctions made between the primary and secondary wives, um, it's rather than think of Confucianism as this very conservative and patriarchal system that oppresses women, it's actually um, it's more it's more who is using Confucianism to oppress the women and um, to change their status. And so it's how Confucianism is used that becomes an issue for the changing status of women in the Choson dynasty. And it becomes like Confucian social engineering. It's a slow process with resistance, and it doesn't really take root until the 16th, 17th centuries in the Choson dynasty. But women eventually lose their inheritance rights. Um, they're the um, there's a ranking of the primary and the secondary wives, um, and there are strict codes of ethical behavior that women are expected to follow. So there's something called the three obediences. So women throughout their lifetime are expected to obey three men. The first is their father, the second is their husband, and the third is their son. So they're expected to abide by this code. There's a segregation of the sexes, of the boys and the girls, and women are forbidden to remarry. So widows are not allowed to remarry, and there's a very rigid prescription for ethical behavior for women. So, for example, a father with an unmarried daughter over the age of 30. So if you're a father and you have a daughter who's over the age of 30 years old, the father is subject to punishment by the government because this unmarried daughter could eventually end up wandering around without a family to rely on, and this causes social problems. Right? So, if you recall when we talked about the policies of the Choson dynasty that tried to control the borders and movement across the borders, and part of this was because if an incident occurred, this didn't affect just the individuals involved, but it affected their families, it affected the governor, it affected the magistrate, and it went all the way up to the king. And this is similar, but on a smaller level, that the parents, particularly the father, the head of the household, is responsible for the behavior of its family and for the functioning of that family. And the proper thing for a father to do is to make sure that his children are married, and particularly a woman, because a woman is not allowed to or not able to care for herself. So, so we have this kind of very strict ethical behavior. Now, this is more than just an ideology. As we've talked or discussed in previous lectures, because of the way that the bureaucracy developed in the Choson dynasty, we begin to see a realignment of kinship lines. So whereas previously sons and daughters received equal inheritances, and both sons and daughters were included in the family genealogy, Maternal grandparents and the wife's parents were also mourned equally. Marriages occurred in the bride's home, and oftentimes the groom would live with the bride's family. In the Joseon dynasty, all of this changes. All of this changes. And um, it's really for pragmatic reasons. So as I gave you that example of trying to maintain the family inheritance rather than dividing it so that they become smaller and smaller, it's better to keep it intact and pass down from generation to generation. This is an outgrowth of very pragmatic ways to try to maintain one's status and resources. All right, so the reality is that it wasn't all doom and gloom for women, and that there's actually more agency for women than is usually depicted. There were men who educated their daughters. There were men who helped women with their education. Queen Sohe was cited in Chinese sources for examples of female roles. Many women were self-taught, and some were even scholars in their own right. And many Neo-Confucian and practical learning scholar families, they encouraged their daughters to pursue scholarship. And so some of these women would later on contribute to philosophy, literature, and the arts. However, it's because this was not institutionalized. We don't have education that is institutionalized or officially recognized by either the state or even society. This was kept within the realm of the home. So, for example, on a 17th century descendant of a Neo-Confucian scholar, Ishek, he wrote that about his aunt. He says she was clever and remembered the theories of the classics and history. What she heard once, she never forgot again. As to the odes and mentions, she could recite them completely and also understood their meaning in broad terms. She was equally familiar with all great families and descent groups in Korea. At times, she discussed past and present in terms of success and failure, of wisdom and unwisdom, and her arguments rarely ever missed the point. Song Shior, on his aunt, he said, the songs for generations instructed sons and daughters in rights and law. The domestic rules are very strict and severe as is fit for an elite house. Since Madame Song received instruction from wise parents, her natural alertness and smartness were heightened. When her brothers received instruction, she listened from the side, remembered everything, and understood the meaning in her heart even better than her brothers. However, because this kind of an education was not really appropriate for a woman to be educated, he continues, he says, she learned to write and had some understanding of written texts. Yet this remained inside the house and did not get known outside. Her sons went to a teacher, and one of the sons talked about his mother, and only then, for the first time, did outsiders learn that she was literate. Such was her virtue. All right, so this is the state of Joseon Dynasty women until the late 19th century. And things change when the Protestant missionaries arrive in Korea. And the Protestant missionaries, we will talk about this in a future lecture, but one of the things that they did in order to try to convert Koreans to Christianity was they opened up schools. So they began, here we have some Christian missionaries. These sisters are actually from Australia. Henry Appenzeller, a Protestant missionary from the United States, he opened up Peja School in 1885. And in 1886, the Iwa School, the very first school for girls, was opened by this lady right here, Mary Scranton, who was a Methodist missionary from the United States. And so, beginning with the Iwa School, we begin. This is where we see the beginnings of modern education for girls and for women. So this is a huge change, a huge change. Um, but I don't want you to think that, oh well, all of a sudden with this new education, this means that Korean women became modernized or westernized overnight, because this too was a slow process. And in fact, Mary Scranton, when she opened up the Iwa School, she said, "We would emphasize, as has always been done in the past, that our school is first of all a school to make Korean girls better Korean girls. Not to make Korean girls into American girls, but to make Korean girls into better Korean girls." And this type of an education then emphasized, they're not emphasizing gender equality and women in the workforce and the right to vote, because this actually wasn't even what American women enjoyed. American women didn't get the right to vote until the following century. But instead, what the kind of education that Mary Scranton brought from the United States was an education for women that emphasized a woman's place in the home and in society based on Christian principles. And so, um, according to the Bible, uh, the the wife is inferior to the husband and plays more of a supporting role of the husband. And the emphasis is on the woman's role as wife and mother. This is actually quite compatible with Confucian ideas of what the woman's role is in the family as well. Um, the main difference now is that women, particularly elite women, are now able to go out in public and have a public presence, whereas this was this was not um, this was not appropriate during the Joseon Dynasty. And so, yes, we have a major change and this really wonderful opportunity for Korean girls now to receive an education, but it's not the kind of education that you receive at Korea University. It's the kind of education that is based on very strong Christian principles, emphasizing the role of women as mothers and wives. All right, so conclusion to all of this is that by the end of the 19th century, with the population influx and all kinds of changes that are occurring, um, differentiation among Yangban, fluctuation among the peasants, decrease in slaves, socioeconomic changes, challenges to and the development of Confucian thought, changes in the status of women. Um, all of these things are affecting and influencing each other, and so when educational opportunities open up, right? So now we have educational opportunities that are available not just for the Yangban men who are preparing for the civil service examination, but now open theoretically to everyone, including women. Who is going to take advantage of these changes and these opportunities? And that's what we're going to look at in the next lecture.